Hey everybody, it's Mike Shea at Transworld Business Advisors. I'm here with Heather Meglino at Spire Law. Heather's worked with us here at Transworld going on, I think, like 5 years, doing a lot of transaction and then some buyer and seller representation. So I wanted to grab her while we all had some downtime to talk about fundamental differences between transactional attorneys and litigation attorneys, and then, how representation works in business transactions. And then obviously the elephant in the room, COVID, and what's happening, what's not, what's essential, what's not, and how litigation's going down. And then a little bit of legal advice for free during this. So glad to see you. Glad you're safe. The floor is yours, madam.
Excellent. Then that reminds me that we should add the legal disclaimer, right?
Yes. Yeah, do your legal disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. She is. Anything she says is from a lawyer, right? But don't take it as legal advice, right? Right.
I was waiting for you to start reading the Miranda rights instead.
Yeah, here's the Miranda rights, right.
But yes, this does not create any legal representation, of course, just some friendly advice, person to person.
There you go.
But thank you for the introduction. I'm Heather Meglino. I work at Spire Law. My practice focuses primarily on business, labor, and employment law, representing only business owners. And that's how I got involved with doing the business transactions as well, representing buyers or sellers, or of course, serving as the closing attorney. So that answer your intro?
Yeah, that's good. Go right ahead.
All right. You ready to jump into the meat?
Yeah, so when people are dealing with business transactions, what's the difference between transactional attorneys and then, the attorneys who represent them? Because they often assume that the closer is representing them, right?
Oh, yes. So that's kind of the neat part, I think, about being the closing attorney, is that you can firmly say, I do not represent either the buyer or the seller. And when, as a lawyer, do you ever get to say, I do not represent any of the parties? To me, that is like the best deal in the world, right?
Right.
No one can be mad.
Right.
So we use those terms a lot, and I'm guilty of it. I throw out the word transactional, and I throw out the word litigation, and we kind of realize that not everyone knows that there is an actual difference between a transactional lawyer. That is somebody who typically does not go to court, right? They're not dealing with any lawsuits. They usually prepare a lot of documents. They do a lot of contract work. They could do mergers and acquisitions, but they're not the ones going to court fighting in state or federal court. So a litigation lawyer is someone who fights on lawsuits, right? They're either filing a lawsuit or they're defending the lawsuit. I find myself usually on the defending end because I represent the business entity. So there is quite a difference between the two. I like to think that that's kind of, what makes me a little bit unique is that I practice in both lanes. So I'm transactional part of the time, drafting the contracts, doing the behind the scenes non-litigation work, working with businesses before they ever get sued. But I'm admitted in all federal courts in Florida, so the southern, the middle, and the northern district. And I go to court and I defend my clients as well. So I think it's kind of unique because you get to see how these issues play out in courts. So oftentimes, if you're just only drafting the contracts, it's kind of like you never know what happens, right? Was that a good contract? Was that a bad contract? Are the judges upholding them? Are they not? So when you get to go to court, to me, it's kind of like the ball game, right? There's the practice in the ball game. Now I get to see, did those skills in the practice setting work, or did they not? You could think of like a trial as the Super Bowl. So I think it's really neat to have that perspective of both. I think it helps.
Because the laws change, right? And if you're using a contract in, a business contract that's existed for 15 years, and everybody uses it, but the laws have changed in the courts, and for example, the real estate agents don't know that because they're not lawyers, and they're still using the same contracts, and the clients go to war, over something, God forbid, then they may have, used a document they thought was solid, and, they don't know the loopholes or how the judges have, adjudicated a case that happened 2 years ago that changed the way or the viability of the document they executed, in the last 6 months.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And keep in mind that not only do the laws change so rapidly as we're seeing with COVID experience, but in each jurisdiction, they could also be treated differently, right? So I could go down to Miami and have a totally different result of something that I have here in Orlando. So it's really interesting just to get those different perspectives of what the
Yeah,
courts are pulling on.
that's an important distinction, since a lot of the clients here in Florida are from either out of state or from other countries. Their understanding of the law is predicated on what they do in their country, and they don't have states and districts. I mean, you maybe get a client from England, and they've, our system is based on English law, but we're a whole lot different than, the system they built, where there's this unifying canon of law that exists, since the Magna Carta. And they're like, look, Slick, Florida didn't become a state till X. So the way they do things in the South, with all the cultural vagaries that happen here and the political winds and who sits in Congress and who sits in the House of Representatives in Tallahassee, dictates the laws here, as opposed to what you brought from New York City or from London. So
Yeah.
It's not right or wrong, it's the law, right? So you need to understand the law, right? So.
Yeah, and that is a really cool part about doing the buy sells of businesses, is when you do get to work with, clients, some clients of which I've never even met face to face, right? We're communicating like this, or we're communicating on the telephone, but it is interesting always navigating them through, okay, your country may do it this way, but this is how we do it. And by the way, America is super litigious, so be careful.
Yeah, and I think you and I both had people who were lawyers in other countries, and they think they can do their job here. And I'm like, you're not a lawyer. It doesn't matter if you were a lawyer in Brazil. Frankly, you're committing a felony by giving legal advice. You need to stay in your lane. I'm sure the University of São Paulo is fantastic, but it doesn't pass muster here. And, that's always a gut check as you kind of navigate the cultural, adjustments. So we've done transactional and we've done litigation. What's up with COVID? And what does that mean, in the context of what businesses need to be doing now? And I guess the governor's he came out with some stuff yesterday or late last night, and I'm expecting the counties and the city to come out with some extra ordinances. By the way, that's not law. That's my Republican. Ordinance is not a law, right? Laws are passed by House of Representatives. So take your civics lessons and understand your rights, people. So go ahead, Counselor.
This is where we have the little disclaimer pop up. Disclaimer.
Right. I could do that. I think I'll try and do that.
I think you should.
Okay.
Little light bulb goes off.
Right.
But I'll talk to you a little bit about just some of the calls that I'm getting from either current clients or potential clients, some of the issues that I've been navigating with them. Of course, early on, it looked much different than, here as we sit here today. So, for example, early on was the uncertainty and really just cancellation of many events, right? So whether companies put on their own conventions, their own events, they're in contracts with vendors. So early on, we were thinking, let's just postpone this event for maybe 30 days and let's work with the venues and things like that. And of course, the outlook was much different. So early on, it was a lot of just contractual questions. I think that started to change. Once the order came out, then we started dealing with issues of what is an essential business. As you know, the order carves out a number of categories, but it doesn't cover everything, right? So then you have to start making arguments about which category could this business potentially fit into. Another issue that I saw with that is, say, one business, they come in and they say, listen, you're not essential, right? But then they go to your competitor down the street and the competitor is still open. Obviously, that causes some tension between businesses. I even saw one where one of their locations was deemed essential and the other location in a different part of town was deemed not essential.
Right.
So, I think just as a result, yes, we've got this order, but just like anything, it's open for interpretation, it's open for arguments. And so, those are the issues that we're really having to navigate pretty quickly on the spot, because if somebody comes in to your business and says, you're shut down, close up. By the way, of course, there's a potential for a penalty, a fine, jail. And so it's pretty serious.
I
So
was listening to the radio yesterday, and there was a business in Texas, a hairstylist, and hairstylists actually have like health requirements, right? So they're actually pretty sterile environments, believe it or not. I mean, they usually wear gloves. They're covered by the DBPR. But in this case, it was a Dallas, Texas salon, and she just said, "I'm opening." And the city council, the DVPR or whatever the correlating agency in Dallas came in and said, "You need to shut down." She says, "That's not the law. You're just making an edict, and I know my rights." And she stayed open. They went and got the cops. The cops came and went, "We can't shut her down. It's not a law." Right? So then they went and got a judge. The judge says, "You have to shut down or it's a civil penalty." And she actually made the news. She's like, "No one's passed a law that says I need to shut down." Now, she's getting benefits from, it's Texas, right? So pretty red state. She's getting a whole bunch of business because of that. A, because she's the only option. B, it's a red state. So she's like, "I'm waiving the Constitution." She's probably handing out Constitution shirts. And, now you have to be kind of prudent about how you play that card. Now, I know locally in Florida, I'm watching and I'm pretty tight with the vacation rental industry, and they've all been shut down, yet the hotels aren't. So it's like, wait a second, how is this soloed, environment where people are close quarters, literally steps from each other, but you're shutting down, all these small businesses? The bottom line is, there's no good answer, right? You can't write a law that ever covers every contingency, and there's always some injustice that are done. And I think, my personal opinion is the businesses, as they reopen and interpret this stuff, need to be leaning forward, doing the best they can to, be sterile, be clean, and, take care of clients themselves and mitigate all this stuff. And then they're going to be in the clear, right?
yeah, and you bring up an interesting point, is that I think, essentially up first when we started this, it was what businesses are closing, and now we're going to be going in reverse, right?
Yeah.
So what does the reopen look like? And I think that's a great point, is these businesses now in the next week, you're going to see a ton of webinars, a ton of information on how to properly advise your employees and how to reopen. So we're going to basically be doing this whole procedure in the reverse. Definitely businesses are not in the clear yet.
What should the business owners be doing from a legal standpoint? And then, how do you mitigate the pain? Like you made an earlier comment, like, I work with businesses before they get to contract or before they ever get to court. How do you stay out of court? Work with a lawyer beforehand. Know what the law is so you don't do something stupid. What's the advice on, okay, you're going to get guidance from on high, but what's the stuff you need to be doing now, from a legal standpoint, just a business, prudence standpoint, so that you don't, rattle the sabers and open up without showing care. And, it's kind of like when you do, I know you do a lot of like EEOC work and sexual harassment work, the education stuff that business owners need to do in light of COVID, and how to lean forward on that.
Yeah, so I think, my first advice would be, as a business owner, you need to find your trusted resources and stick to only those resources. So for example, SHRM is a great resource for employers and HR. DOL.gov, right? Department of Labor.gov, obviously a great resource. So first thing I would say is just pick your resources, keep it limited to those and those only, because there's so much information out there on the news, and people, of course, they want their SEO to rank and whatnot, so they're reposting, and I'm finding that not all the information is accurate. So I would definitely pick those top resources and start gathering, of course, shameless plug, gather your trusted advisors, whether that is your lawyer, your CPA, your business broker, whoever is in your trusted group. That's the team that you want to assemble, because sometimes I'm finding that, I'm not necessarily giving legal advice. It's just that I've become a trusted professional. And
Right.
so they're asking me those questions that are like the gut, does this feel right? What should I do? Not legally, what should I do?
And the point is, like, I think you're making is that they're sitting there all at home and they're watching the news and they're getting tidbits and they're hearing a million points of view, and it's the telephone game. This pizza parlor down the street is opened up and they're doing it this way, and you heard from this person on your Facebook page, this is what you do. It's like, look, the reason we play those games as kids is to learn a lesson. And we do it before COVID happened. I mean, with relation to immigration stuff, we would hear that. I heard it's X. I'm like, have you read the law? Did you actually go and read the law? Well, no. Well, let's do that. Let's go to the actual website, read the law, print a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
So when someone comes to you and says, I heard it's X, or you're not doing it right, go, here's the law. Back off. Or have your team, which you should have had long before COVID started, and make sure they do their jobs and they're not interpreting data from 20 years ago, right? That they're current and that they're practicing. It's not a CPA who, does your taxes and that's all they do. They're not like staying current with their professional development, right? That stays current with this stuff so they can give you the proper, insight. Just like with PPP, it's like you saw that how do you do it? Right? What documents do you need to have? So when you get into the website, you're not halfway through it and you're like, oh crap, what do I need to have? Where's that file? So I can load these documents on there, and then you get kicked out of the system and you get frustrated. So the key advisors is like super, super important.
Yeah, I think, those things that you mentioned, I think also having a plan, have a written down plan of action and what this is going to look like. And I would, as a business owner, I would start walking through that, because as you start to walk through that plan, you're going to think of these other items. This is new, right? So
Right.
None of us have been through this. None of us have been through the reopen. So I think with that, there isn't a written book of how to open post-COVID for dummies. We don't have that. So I think coming up with a plan.
Write that. You should write that. How to open up your business post-COVID, right?
Trust me, I've been thinking of some things.
Right.
So, I think you've got to have a plan that's well thought out. I think communicate, as far as employees, just like anything, communication is key. You need to be honest with your employees. They can smell it from a mile away if you're not being honest with them. I think there are a lot of emotions, like you said, right? What about the furloughed employees that are now going to be coming back off of furlough? You've got tons and tons of emotions in your workplace. It's not one of those that we just walk through the door and we're back and everything is fine.
Right.
So I think that, an open and honest form of communication, making sure that you're communicating with them every step of the way, and that you're also candid that you might not know some things, right? I think you should tell your employees, if you do not know the answer, hey, I don't know the answer to this. Let me, check on it. Let me get with my team and let me get back to you, because I don't know the answer.
That's super important, that they don't say something, when they don't know. And it's okay to be a business owner and not know the answer. You're not supposed to, if you're a chef, right, and you've got a million things to memorize and you're supposed to be executing, putting meals out there, and you're trying to make sure your customer service is there. It's okay not to know how furloughing and onboarding customers back, works. And that's what you have your people around you for, to help you do that. But that's why that planning and writing it down, and actually I would add to that, going over that with your team, because the second set of eyes and the third set of eyes brings to light things that you don't always consider because you just don't have the experience. But your professional team, you practice law, you've seen, your customers run the gamut from service companies to, tech companies and the like. So you've seen how things are addressed. And, institutionally, you take that lesson learned and you apply it to another customer so they can kind of take the benefit. And that's the benefit of the advisors, because they've seen a lot of things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the last part that I would add to that is just, trust your instinct, trust your gut. I feel like I'm constantly telling business owners, the second that you think that something isn't right, or, if I always say this, right? Call me before you fire someone. Just having that couple minute conversation to walk through it can really save you down the line, because I think how business owners handle this situation, how they really handle any of those situations in the workplace, if it's a layoff, a furlough, termination, really, is dependent upon what the outcome is down the line, and whether that employee decides to file suit is how you handled it in that moment.
Right.
That to me is what leads to lawsuits, because it's the emotional component that leads an employee to sue you, because they feel like either justice wasn't served, they didn't get a proper investigation, or whatever it may be, that you just didn't listen to them in that moment.
Right. And they didn't have all the information, and they weren't communicated to it. Like, we're in uncertain times, so it's super important that you over communicate in a variety, not just, hey, I wrote it down or I said it once. You need to reiterate over and over and over and over and over again, because the people you're communicating to, whether it be customers, the community, the employees, their families, they're all on edge, and you can never over communicate enough. And you need to keep doing that until it kind of, everybody's on the same sheet of music. And then you'll be surprised how few problems pop up, because sometimes that crowd, whether it be family, friends, other employees, will check the confusion before it ever resurfaces again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, yes, and I sit here and I represent the business, the company, but, you have to realize the emotions are high on both ends. The business, this is their livelihood, and they're also employing all these individuals. So it's not to say that there are not tons and tons of emotions, as I'm sure you've seen, especially with, sellers selling a business, of how emotionally charged those transactions can become.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I was talking to one of our offices in another part of the country, and we're being very careful about how we communicate as a company, but we know, because we've been through this before, not a virus, but we've been through hurricanes, we've been through floods in Houston, we've been through the fires in California, and we've been through the recession, and there was carnage as a consequence of that. And it's almost like being a physician, where you know what the outcomes are. The very worst thing you can do is not deal with it, but you have to be sensitive to the reality that business owner, who owns a restaurant, who has been operating on a 30-day cash flow, and the state says shut it down. I had a customer, this week shut down. She had a business and she shut down, and I reached out and I said, look, when it's time to talk, but here are the things you need to be considering, but I'm not going to push it. But it's not a pleasant, it's not a pleasant discussion. It's like, you may need to liquidate, and here's how we're going to do this. And what you invested, you're not going to get back. But someone needs to tell them the truth. And they, as a business owner and the family that flows from that, they need to react. And 9 times out of 10, they appreciate it. But you just can't be like a vulture. And they're coming in too. We're seeing the vultures coming in from a buyer standpoint, trying to pick the bones of the carcasses. And I'm sitting there going, y'all need to back off, because it's not that bad. Okay. We're not, this isn't nuclear Armageddon. We're going to get up and we're going to run, because it's amazing how businesses have reacted. The restaurants, they pivoted fast to be in survival mode, and their business model will change, but everybody's had to shift. The landlords have had to shift. The vendors, the bankers have had to shift. Everybody's shifted and has pivoted, because they know we all kind of live and die together. So this adversarial, litigation thing, I saw a post yesterday. You're going to hate this. Well, actually you won't, because you're one of the good lawyers. There was a post from a former colleague of mine who said, will this COVID have an impact on tort reform? Will it kind of say, okay, you can't just butcher these businesses because they're on edge now, so be careful of going after the businesses, because the ripple effect is massive. And we know before COVID, there were people just filing frivolous lawsuits, driving around, going after small businesses, and, because it was how they made their living. And now I think, that stuff won't be looked at very nicely by the House or the judges, because they're going to see it for what it is,
Yeah, and we're still seeing those lawsuits being filed.
Really?
That those lawsuits are still being filed. And I think you hit a great point. Is that this really does expose businesses, right? The exposure is great right now because think of just how many decisions they're having to make in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
And of course, anytime you're hiring and firing employees and changing that makeup, that is always going to, increase your liability. So
Right.
now they're really making those decisions. Their landscape is changing completely. So I tend to think that this is going to, cause a pretty large spike in business and employment cases when we get, to the point where, like you're saying, maybe some people don't feel comfortable filing right now. And if the business isn't open, they're really not filing. But I think as soon as everything seems back and running, that's a great time that we're going to see a spike in those cases.
I would be, if I was in the legal world, I would be very, very cautious of overplaying that hand. A, given the electoral year we're in, how that will play in the public could really bring about a a legal scenario that doesn't end well for the attorneys who kind of do that stuff. Um,
Yeah,
it's like, look, you can't prey upon the weak. That's going to be viewed, particularly in America. That's not kosher. You know, you can
I
paint
agree.
you can paint businesses as big bad things, but right now I think everyone's going, wow, it's not these big bad. These are my neighbors, and you're being sued because you were trying to survive, and that's not going to go over well. And the backlash could go in the opposite direction if they're thinking long-term survivability of their practice or of the industry on the whole in terms of that type of legal action. I mean, you alluded to it. Hey, our country's really litigious. Well, why? Well, because it's a business. That's how they make their living. And you start really going after businesses who by no fault of their own had to do things they didn't want to do, right? And you start going after them. That's not going to play well in the public. I hope.
I hope you're right. I was
God
just
willing.
going to say, I hope you're right.
Yeah.
But if that is something that, something good has come of this, is just like you said, that businesses now all of a sudden are not seen as, not viewed as this big bad corporate entity. We're seeing mom and pop shops brought to light here.
Yeah.
That, like you said, these are our neighbors, these are our friends, these are, the community pub at the end of the street where people gather and they socialize.
Right.
And so I think we're definitely seeing businesses in a different light, which I really like. I really appreciate, because people always ask me, how do I represent the bad guy? And that question just always drove me nuts. So
These are the
I really
people.
hope this changes.
Yeah, I mean, these businesses, they're not multi-billionaires. They're not, monolithic, like these evil, white men in three-piece suits smoking cigars and drinking brandy. These are people who spend their entire day, and nights sometimes running businesses to make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 and to be nailed by a lawsuit because they had to do something because the governor told them to. And you and I live in this world, so we see it pretty regularly that people do this. And then they're like, oh my gosh, they didn't realize that goes on. And it's like, yeah, well, that's not right. It's that Al Pacino thing. It's not right or wrong. Or what's that movie, For Justice for All, right? Where he loses it. It's the law. The law is not always fair, right? You're out of order. I'm out of order. The whole system's out of order, right? All
Yeah.
right. Well, this is a long one, so I wanted to let you give your shameless plug. How can people get a hold of you? Website, phone number, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to reach me is just give me a call or send me a text message at 407-900-7440. I'm sure, Mike, you can attest to this. I'm a responsive lawyer. I'm always trying to get back to people immediately. I'm always surprised at, how many clients I land because I'm the only one that called them back. So
Yep.
definitely reach out to me on that number. Our firm website is Spire. It's SPIRE lawfirm.com. Shameless plug, but there's a really great PPP tool for businesses. There's a calculator on there. I know we're about to have a second round of PPP funding. So businesses can go on our website. They can use our calculator. It also helps them know what documents they need to gather. So definitely check that out.
Yes. Get that before you go on.
Yeah, do that before you apply. We are really, this is all new to us as well. So we are spending day in and day out just educating ourselves and making sure, we're used to being experts on the topics that we practice in. And all of a sudden, we're learning as quick as we can with the rest of the general public. So we are, doing our best to stay informed and help all of our clients in our community and help them walk through this, even if they just need that sounding board of it's going to be okay, you're going to be okay, your business is going to be okay. That's what we're here for.
Thanks, Heather. I appreciate it. Stay safe. Go run a marathon.
I will, maybe tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Take
Mike.
care. Bye-bye.